Okay, and today I'm going to talk about a subject that for some people they might find it a little strange that we're talking about it, but I'm going to talk about weakness today. And I don't know when you, in your life, when you've had to fill out a reference form or you've had to, whether it's an application for something, and it's on one of these bits of the application form where you have to list your strengths. And you sit there and you're like, oh, okay, my strengths. And then you think, oh, like, I don't want to sound arrogant, so I'm not going to put a whole list down. At least that's what I like. And then you're just like, strengths. What do I need to put down? What do I need to write down? And then I never know what to write because I'm just like, one of my strengths I like to think is eating, but I think I can't put that on an application for something. Doesn't really make sense. I also think one of my strengths, not because I'm especially brilliant at it, but I can do it, is walking. I can walk, and I'm just thinking maybe I should put that down on there. But then you get to the next part of your application form, and it's got weaknesses. And that's the part of the application form that you're like, how honest should I be? You think, what do I actually put down? How deep do you want me to go? I mean, like, I could put hay fever. That's one of my weaknesses. I hate that. For some of you, you might be like, oh, dairy products. That's the weakness for me. I'm lactose. But what do you put down in those things? I always struggle to do it. Some people struggle more with the strengths part. Some will struggle more with the weaknesses part. But the weird thing is that all through the Bible, we see weak people. We see weak people being used by God. People that are full of pride. People that are sinful or selfish. People that make mistakes. People that make bad decisions. People that have serious issues. That have a tough life. Things have gone wrong. Maybe they're suffering or they've suffered. We see these people being used by God. You look at most of the people throughout the Bible that are used by God, and they're weak. People like Abraham, so many issues. Samson, even more issues. Someone like David, problems in his life. Then you go to someone like Peter, huge problems. All of the disciples had issues and weaknesses in their life, but God used them to change the face of the earth. The guy we're going to focus on tonight is a guy called Paul. And this was a guy who was called Saul, and his name got changed, but obviously he wasn't a great speller, so God was like, we'll only change one letter. But he was a guy who essentially approved of the killing of Christians, arranged the persecution of Christians. He was pretty driven to do that. And all of a sudden, one day, Jesus meets with him. The risen Jesus meets with him, which really makes you focus on someone where he's like, I thought you were the guy that's dead. And then he's like talking to him. Paul's life is turned upside down. Paul's life completely changes. He goes from being a persecutor of Christians to someone that is preaching that people would become Christians. And he writes loads of letters. He went on to plant churches, tons of them, and write at least half of our New Testament. And we're going to look today in the book of 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians. So if you've got a Bible on your phone or iPad, iPod, etc., or the paper copy, I know, that Will probably gave you, then have a look at 2 Corinthians. And we're going to go through quite a lot of 2 Corinthians today, not like in detail, don't worry. We're going to kind of skip between different parts, but this is kind of important for us. In 2 Corinthians, chapter 1, verse 8, Paul begins in this letter, and he says this, 2 Corinthians 1:8, he says, "We do not want you to be uninformed, brothers, about the hardships we suffered in the province of Asia. We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired even of life. Indeed, in our hearts we felt the sentence of death. But this happened that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. He has delivered us from such a deadly peril, and he will deliver us. On him we have set our hope that he will continue to deliver us. As you help us by your prayers, then many will give thanks on our behalf, for the gracious favor granted us in answer to the prayers of many. See, Paul's talking, he says, I've got hardships, troubles in my life at the moment. And actually, it seems like it's more than just, I don't know, he's had a bad week or a bad day. He says statements like, I felt the sentence of death on my life. That's a hardcore statement to make. But he also goes on to say, God delivers us. If you move on, 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 6. Paul comes in, he says this, for God who said, let light shine out of darkness, made his light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Christ. And that's a complicated sentence, but don't worry. But we have this treasure, this light of God in jars of clay, to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not us. We are hard-pressed on every side. This is when it sounds like he's in a cider factory. We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not abandoned. Struck down, but not destroyed. We always carry around in our body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body. When you get this and you read this, you're like, wow, his life is hard. Like his ministry, what he's doing for God seems really hard as well. But he talks about this light of God that is in his heart. And really what he's talking about there is like the fact that he knows God and he knows Jesus. This light of the world living within him. And he says he has this treasure in a jar of clay. Why does he use that analogy? Well, it's an analogy that would have been well understood by his audience. For us, it makes no sense. But in these times, to people, even in Corinth, where he was writing, people would buy a posh jar or pot, and they would put it somewhere in their house. Then with this posh jar, they would be like, oh, let's put all our valuables, our money, our jewelry, our gold in this jar to hide it away. Now, the trouble is when thieves broke into the house, they went in and they were like, okay, let's take some stuff. So they walk around the house, and so they're like, right, let's take their Mac. We'll have that. We'll have their 50-inch TV. And, oh, that pot looks nice. Let's take that pot. They take the pot. When they get the pot back to their thieves' house, or whatever you might call it, they look inside and they're like, wow, amazing. All the jewelry's inside this pot. That's fantastic. We've got all their money and valuables as well. So people of the time kind of cottoned onto this and was like, oh, maybe we need to change what we're doing. So people of the time would go out and they would buy an old, rubbish, cracked jar or pot. And they would put it in their house somewhere, and then they would put all their valuables inside that rubbish, broken pot. So when the thieves come, they're like, right, let's take the Mac, let's take the 50-inch TV, let's take the nice jar over there. Oh, let's leave that one. That one's not very nice. Genius. But Paul is using this analogy for us because actually what may look normal or even worthless on the outside has a treasure on the inside. And that's a picture for us, that God places his treasure, his love, his grace, his strength in us, in you. And you might not think you look that great. You might not think you have it all together. You might think, oh, I just feel like I'm a cracked jar. And God's like, that's all the better. We're just like broken jars, because when we are broken, the light of God that is inside the jar can shine out all the more. It shines through the cracks. It shines through the holes and the chips. We're just broken jars that God puts his treasure in. And at this point, I just want to say that Paul had a great life before he became a Christian. Before Paul met Jesus, his life would have been pretty good. He would have been making quite a lot of money. I assume his life, although he was driven to do what he was doing, persecuting Christians, he thought he was doing the right thing, probably got something from it and thought, yeah, this is good. I would suggest that when he met Jesus, as I said, his life was turned on its head. But I also suggest that Paul's life got more complicated. It got harder. He suffered a lot more from that point. Maybe he even felt more broken from that point onwards. I also suggest that Paul would not change that encounter with Jesus and that transformation for anything. You see, the lie is that even you often hear a speaker saying, is that become a Christian, your troubles will go, you will get healthy and wealthy, life will be great. And it's rubbish. When you follow Jesus, life doesn't become easy. All your troubles don't disappear. And in fact, often more arise in your life. You read on in chapter 5. And Paul in chapter 5 says that actually Christ's love compels him to carry on. I suggest that nothing would stop Paul from carrying on and doing this, even though life may have got harder for him, may have had more troubles. I think his relationship with Jesus, his experience of Jesus' love, compels him to continue because he knew the value and the treasure of knowing Jesus. We read on, we're not going to read it tonight, but chapter 6, Paul talks again, and he goes through what his ministry and his life is like. And he says things that he's been attacked, he's been despised, he's been ignored, he's been close to death, he's been beaten, he's poor. But also when you read chapter 6, you get a sense that he's saying, but Jesus is worth it all. He's worth it. I wouldn't change it for anything. Chapter 5, if you're still there. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 5 to 7. And Paul says this, for when I came to Macedonia, this body of ours had no rest. We were harassed at every turn. Sounds like working with sparklers or something, doesn't it, in church? But we were harassed at every turn. Conflicts on the outside, fears within. But God, who comforts the downcast, comforts us by the coming of Titus. And not only by his coming, but also by the comfort you had given him. He told us about your longing for me, your deep sorrow, your ardent concern for me, so that my joy was greater than ever. You see, these guys who are doing this ministry for God, they're knackered. They're harassed. They're fearful. And God comforts them by letting Titus go to them. You see, God comforts us in our troubles, in our times of weakness and struggle. God comforts us very often by bringing people into our lives. God comforts us by bringing someone that we can talk to, someone that we can pray with, someone that brings joy to us. And I want to encourage you, as I always say, guys, you need each other. To live the Christian life, you've got to have strong relationships with one another. You've got to have friendships. People that you just go to. Not that you just sit down and you pray with and you read your Bible with, but people you just go to, be yourself with, have a laugh with. So important. Just feel good around. I'm so lucky that in my job, I get to work with my friends. And to be honest, the guys that help out within A2J, it's amazing that I can get just to hang out with, work with, pray with people that are my friends. And they serve you guys like crazy, give up loads of their time to do that. But I also want to say they bring me comfort, they bring me joy, They make my life better. Guys, we all need to invest in friendships. It's important. It's one way that God helps us through the hard times. I want to just skip over a couple of chapters to chapter 11. Chapter 11, verse 23. Paul is currently in this kind of statement where he's just blurting stuff out a lot of the time. It just looks like he's just got to get it out. And he's speaking about his weaknesses, his sufferings. He's even boasting in them. And he says this, chapter 11, verse 23, maybe I'll come in. Are they servants of Christ? Am I out of my mind to talk like this? I am more. I have worked much harder, been in prison more frequently, been flogged more severely, and been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I received from the Jews 40 lashes minus 1. I'd suggest you just say 39. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I had been constantly on the move. I had been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my own countrymen, in danger from the Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, in danger from false brothers. I have labored and toiled and often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst and have often gone without food. I have been cold and naked. What do we get from that? Well, one of the big things is that Paul's in danger. And I think he wants to get that across. But he's also telling them, my life isn't great in ministry. My ministry is great because I love Jesus, but my life isn't great. I suffer. He says, I'm always in danger. We also learn from this that Paul needs to find new ways of traveling. To get shipwrecked 3 times is just kind of like careless. Imagine being one of his traveling companions, and it's just like, oh, Paul, how are we going to go to Crete today? And he's like, we're going to go by boat. And it's like, I'm going to swim. Because it's just like, we're going to get wet anyway because you get shipwrecked all the time. Then verse 30, Paul goes on and says something that I don't suspect any of us will be in a place where we're completely comfortable with this. Chapter 11 of 2 Corinthians, verse 30 says, if I must boast, I will boast in the things that show my weakness. How many of you feel comfortable with boasting about the things that show your weakness, that show your vulnerability, that show your humanity? You know, it's not about going around telling everyone your problems. It's not about getting attention. He's saying, I'm just going to be honest with you. This is how I feel. This is how I felt. These are the issues that I have at the moment in my life. Yes, God delivers me. He's with me and he's in me. But this is what my life is like. He says even before in 1 Corinthians, in his first letter that he writes, 1 Corinthians 2, verse 3, he says to the church in Corinth, I came to you in weakness, with great fear and trembling. He says, when I came to you, I was scared. I didn't know what I was going to do. And then later on in, or actually slightly earlier, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 27, it says, God chose the things the world considers foolish in order to shame those things, those who think they are wise. He chose the things that are powerless to shame those who are powerful. In those statements that Paul is talking in 1 Corinthians, he's essentially saying, I'm foolish, I'm powerless. He's weak. But this is a guy that changes the face of the world. And he's saying, I'm really weak. I struggle with stuff. Verse 12, Paul kind of continues on this kind of same topic. And in verse 7 of 2 Corinthians 12, he says this, to keep me from becoming conceited because it is surpassing great revelations, there was given me a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. Now, people don't know what this thorn in his flesh was. It's not a literal thorn in his flesh, okay? It's something in his life that he labels as a messenger from Satan. And scholars have argued about what they think it might be. People say it could have been a specific temptation in his life. Some people say it could have been an illness that he had that recurred, malaria or something like that. Some people say it was problems with his eyes. Some people say it was an issue with his speech. Some people say maybe it was an emotional issue that he had. And he says here, to keep me from becoming conceited, to keep me from becoming proud and full of myself. God allows this in my life. God allowed it in his life to keep him humble. But if you're anything like me, you look at this and you're like, but I argue with God a little bit on this, but I'm like, but if you took away the thorn in his flesh, whatever that might be, I assume Paul would be more effective for you. Therefore, your kingdom would grow and more people would come to know Jesus. And I realize sometimes when I'm arguing with God, I am arguing with the creator of the world. He made my mind that's trying to reason with him and argue with him. And it doesn't work too well. Because actually, God is less concerned with what we do. And he's more concerned with who we are. He's concerned with who you're becoming rather than what you do for him. And actually, God's concern was that Paul would become full of pride, that he would become conceited, that he would start to think it's about him and his power. So God allows something in Paul's life that was already there and says, I'm going to not take that away, Paul, for now, because I want your character to be right. And I love people that are open and honest about this. When, even at Soul Survivor in the last few years, hearing people that people put on a pedestal because they might speak at a large conference or something like this. Someone like Andy Croft being really open about anxiety and panic attacks. Mike Pilavachi being really honest about health issues and loneliness. A guy I heard about once, and I heard him talking. And when I think he was 13, basically his hair just went gray within like a few months. And as you can imagine, his time at school was rubbish. He was taking the mick out of constantly. Just roasted for it. And all the time, this guy who's a Christian was like, God, why? Why would you let that happen so that I get mocked and I get teased? This guy grows up and he's still quite a young guy. He's in his early 20s with like completely gray hair. And he goes on a mission to Africa. And he goes to a place, and I can't remember the country, but he goes to a tribe within that country. And he goes with a couple of other people to share the gospel with these people, and they haven't really heard the gospel before. When he gets there, they don't listen to the other guys he's with. They come straight to him and all gather around him. They hang on his every word as he's speaking. He cannot understand why. So he asks them, in time, through an interpreter, he says, why are you listening to me? Why are you hanging on every word that I say instead of these people? And they were like, it's because you've got gray hair. In their village, in their society, in their tribe, no one had gray hair. They have a genetic thing within them that actually no one gets gray hair. So this gray-haired guy from all around the area, everyone was flocking to see him, being like, what's this guy with gray hair? This guy goes on to preach and work with these people. Hundreds of them become followers of Jesus. I remember myself in my life being broken by situations or problems many times, feeling so weak. I remember being ill when I was a teenager for like 18 months, never thinking I was going to get better, feeling broken that God had abandoned me. When I was younger again, being so shy, painfully shy, that I wouldn't really ever talk to people. Guys, we all have stuff in our life, whether it's present now or it's something from the past. a thorn, if you like, an illness, an emotional issue, a problem, things you're going through. And guys, it's there right now. Maybe some of you know this. It might go, or it might not go straight away when you ask God. And I do believe that God does heal emotionally, physically, spiritually. He heals the broken. But sometimes he allows stuff in our life to form our character. Sometimes he allows stuff in our lives. And the aim of allowing that in our lives is that actually it draws us to him. That we, because we're in such a place of brokenness or in such a struggle, that we cling to Jesus all the more. And he uses it for good. He turns it around in our lives and uses it for good. Paul goes on after talking about this thorn in his flesh, and he says this: 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he, God, said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, and difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. You see, weaknesses in our lives, they help us to continually remember that God's grace is enough for us. That he is more than enough. That God's grace saves us, yes, saving grace. But also God gives us grace to allow us to live the Christian life. And I love the statement. My power, God says, is made perfect in weakness. If that's true, then God's power is not made perfect in your strength. In my strength, in my confidence, God's power will not fully be perfected. You know why? Because in my strength, in my confidence, I think I can do it. I think I can do this. I can solve this. When I'm out of my depth, when life is hard, when I think, God, I can't do this, God moves all the more through my life. And therefore, Paul says, I'm going to boast about my weaknesses. I'm going to delight in the fact that I have hardships, persecutions, difficulties, that I get shipwrecked 3 times. I love this. See, when life is tough, Paul says, I'll take heart because God is with me, because he's working in me, because he's strengthening me. His grace is enough. His power is perfected in my weakness, in my limitation. And I read a verse right at the start. 2 Corinthians 1, 8 to 11, some verses. And Paul was talking about hardships in this. And there's the bit where he said, I felt the sentence of death on my life. And then he goes on and says, these things happen so that we might rely on God rather than ourselves. See, that's Paul's life. That's where life is really found. If you rely on yourself for your decisions, for what you do at work, for what you do at college, for what you do at school, for your intelligence, you rely on your intelligence, you rely on your gifts, you rely on your humor, you rely on your looks, life will not be lived to its fullness. But actually, we live our lives in all their fullness when we rely on God. I can't do this, God, but you can. That's the way to be truly joyful. That's the way to be truly free. That's the way to actually live an adventure with Jesus. When you're like, I can't do this. I'm not able. I can't overcome this problem in my life. I can't change myself or this other person. I can't speak about my faith to someone. I get so scared about it. I can't pray for somebody. I can't preach. I can't play in a worship band. I can't overcome this temptation. I can't be free. That's the place where God's like, great, I know you can't do it. I've been waiting for you to say that you can't. But don't leave it at the I can't. Use the next statement, but God, you can. God, you can bring change to me. You can help me overcome temptation. You can help me share my faith. Your power through me is what prayer is all about anyway. God, you can do it. Your grace is enough for me. And guys, the saying that's quite popular, but it's very true. When we reach the end of ourselves, we become to the beginning of God. We get to a place where it's like, God, now I need to rely on you. I want to discover you. And guys, if you take nothing away from tonight, apart from this one statement that's coming up now, like, that's it. That's great. Your weakness, your issues, your problems, they never disqualify you from serving Jesus. They never disqualify you from being used by him. Every part of my ministry, if I'm honest, like the majority of it, is done in weakness. Well, I think, God, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know how. Even this morning, before I got up, and I was great privilege of baptizing a few people, Megan and Hannah and Jeet this morning. Before I get up, and all I have to do is stand on stage and say some stuff. Being really honest, I'm sat there at the end of the worship time, and Trav's doing a great job of just introducing the service. And I'm sat there, and if I'm honest, my prayer is this: God, I don't know if I can do this. What if my words will come out wrong? What if I look like an idiot? I normally look like an idiot, I know that. But what if I say the wrong thing? What if I forget some stuff? What if I don't do it right today? I'm like, God, I don't know if I can do this. Guys, that's the best place to be. Ministry, work for God, needs to be done in weakness. Remember, we are just cracked, broken jars that God's light lives in, and he shines through us and from us all the more. Remember, his strength is made perfect in our weakness. We're going to pray together. So why don't we stand where we are?